So the reason I brought up this app was that the main reason that Irembo is particularly excited about Flutter is because of this app that we launched in March. And to give you a little bit of context, when we launched it, we had a target to get 1,000 users and 400 car owners in the first month. But we managed to achieve 1,500 users and 450 car owners in just 2 weeks. You know, you get. But before I forget, Giza, you can, someone, something for that person. So another thing is that excluding some challenges we made while trying to deploy the app that we'll mention later in the talk, this app took only 1 month in development, right? Hamilton took 2 months. Okay, yeah. And one good thing about Flutter is that with the same code base, you can develop for multiple platforms. Yeah. So another thing I'm going to do maybe to shake you a little bit. I don't know if you all introduced yourselves to each other, but we're going to do one fun thing. So I want you to give your neighbor a compliment, but, use technical terms. Okay, let's say I may say Sam is maybe like as structured as Java.
Be careful to not get too pushy.
Yeah, okay, if you're a designer, you may say what? Find some technical term that you're familiar with to tell your neighbor and you can hear their feedback too. Yeah, just take a few seconds to do that, please.
Some people are not compiling the code that you just said.
I already told you mine, so you can...
You're as fast as Flutter.
As fast as Flutter, okay. Great. Okay. Okay, I think at least you now go to even hear your neighbor's voice, You know that they're not mute. Yeah, so now as you've seen, we started with an introduction, and now we've seen Sam's presentation. I've prepared some questions, and they're in multiple sections, right? So I may ask something that you were wondering about, so please be attentive, so that in case I don't ask your question for you, you write it down, then you can ask it later, right? Cool.
And if I don't answer, you can also ask later. It's fine.
Mm-hmm. Cool. So I'll start with a few opening questions. Can you share how you first got started with Flutter and what inspired you to stick with it, especially coming from a back-end background?
Thank you. I think I first had an encounter with Flutter in my previous workplace. We were working on a project that involved building some kind of mobile app. And at the time, we were really excited with the new technologies that were coming out. And there was a lot of debate. I think my previous coworker is there. But we ended up deciding using React Native at the time, mainly because we were used to the format of React, and it was something to be easy to adapt to. We were able to finish the project, but we were like, what can Flutter actually do? Can it do all? Is it worth all the hype that it's talking about? And yeah, we all worked separately on our own side projects to see how it was. Some people stuck with it. I was still a bit skeptical, but along the way, I got to enjoy it more, especially since it was a bit familiar with the code that I was writing in other areas, like in the backend. Yeah.
So I think for the backend developers, try it out too if you have not yet. The second most obvious question is why Flutter over React Native?
Yeah, I think that one is what many people wanted to also ask.
I'm asking for people who we saw like most people are TypeScript and JavaScript developers. So why go write or learn that at all?
I'm not against React Native, first of all. Don't go for me. But in my personal opinion, I think that well, at the time of the decision, I think that Flutter had most benefits. They shared some similarities, but the two benefits that I saw, or the three, is its inversion of control, meaning that the Flutter team really made sure that if you need to do something, you don't have 1,000 ways to do it. There's one documentation that they show you how you can do it. If you want to do it in a different way, you can, but they're focusing on making sure that you just deliver the core value that you want, and everything else they'll handle it. The other perk was in terms of performance. Well, at least at the time, I think there's some improvements that were made on React Native. Given with the presentation that we've made that the code of Flutter and Dart actually goes back to the low-level code, it had some performance gains over React Native. And the type system, well, you can argue that if you did React Native with TypeScript, it will beat the advantage. But we also need to remember that TypeScript is some kind of transpiler that still goes down to JavaScript. So in my opinion, that's why I would say that we chose Flutter over React Native. I don't know if people are convinced, but yeah.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. There's this time, I don't know if, okay, for all of you JavaScript developers, have you ever gone into a code base? You know, it's JavaScript, but you're like, what is this? You know, like there's a lot of ways, you know, to do things. And since JavaScript is weakly typed, yeah, you get, some people get creative with it.
Which is a benefit. I mean, you can do things fast, but when you have a team of 50, it gets a bit tricky.
Yeah. Another question is, given the user feedback we got on the app, which was mostly positive, and I wanted to know what Flutter-specific technical decisions that drove this success and user adoption.
Well, I won't say it was mainly Flutter-specific. It was just maybe the people. First, the people who worked on it had a big impact on it. The effort to develop an app in general is not really easy. But if you go in the technical terms, it was mainly looking at what experience we wanted to give to the users. Obviously, we don't have too many services at the moment, given the time span that we had to develop. But we wanted to make sure that we separate the user experience that we have from the web, so Irembo Gov web, from what we want to provide on the app, identifying what's the easiest way that we think is the best to actually allow someone to do a specific action, and also making sure that things are translated in language that people can understand, because releasing an app only in English, I think wouldn't have served the app, especially given that this is a run-done first app that will be released.
Yeah. So maybe one thing I can add to that, okay, for people who wonder why don't we have more services on the app, we didn't want to just bring the whole Irembo on a mobile, right, as it is. Because you can use it in your browser, in your phone, right? But we wanted to leverage how, you know, these mobile technologies are built to give you an experience that really feels different. You know, if you've ever paid like traffic fines on that app, you know how it feels. Kind of feels good, although you know you are being punished. Yeah. Okay. Now, could you also describe a specific problem you solved with Flutter at Irembo that you are proud of? And I'll combine this with another question that says, what custom Flutter packages has your team at Irembo developed internally, and how have they addressed specific needs for the Rwandan market?
So we had a specific problem where we knew eventually we're going to bring in multiple services and options on the app. Even though right now things are small and little, but we knew that along the way, there's a possibility that more things will be brought in. And we didn't want to be in a position where the more services we have, the more code we have to develop. And so we thought, okay, let's create something that will help us to at least manage whatever user experience we have that's in a form factor dynamically. So kind of like a dynamically rendered form through some kind of JSON.
Yeah.
And we use that in other places on our platform, but we wanted to also bring that in on the app to help us in the sort of developer experience and maintainability of the app. The challenge was we had some options we were looking at. There were a couple of packages that gave us feel that they were providing the same, but there were some things that were limited, especially in things like custom validations and some other things like that. So we decided to build our own internal tool that will help us to essentially convert whatever is in a JSON format and render it in some kind of form. Yeah. I think there are some of the guys that are not happy whenever they hear JSON. They'll know why, but yeah.
Senior JSON engineers.
Yeah, but it's an internal joke. Sorry. But yeah, I think that's something that I'm happy that we worked on, and I think we'll reap some benefits along the way. In terms of the package, that could potentially be a package. It's not open to the world yet. Hopefully, we'll be able to make that work.
Yeah. So, like, if anyone knows Formly, I believe it's kind of, Formly, but for mobile.
Yeah.
And maybe to shed more light on this and how important it is. Let's say if you are building your app, maybe gym fitness, it's fine to just build your app as it is, No one will come and tell you, at least the changes will be minimal. But if you're onboarding a service that, let's say for a government institution, tomorrow they could go in a meeting and say, we no longer need this field, or we need this other field, right? There will be a lot of changes constantly. So if new changes means, rebuilding the app, republishing it, and we have to install another version for us to see the change, that would be a really poor design. That's why this was a really important thing to do. Now we're going to dive deeper into technical questions. How do you balance the trade-offs between Flutter's promise of write once, run anywhere, and the need for platform-specific optimizations in Irembo's applications?
Well, I think currently we don't have any need to write platform-specific features. Flutter provides good SDK to actually work with a mobile app. Most times when you want to actually build like your own custom interaction with the device is when you want to have some kind of interaction with the actual physical device at the low level, so something like Bluetooth or NFC. But the good thing is the Flutter community has already worked on most of those common things. But if you do come in a scenario where you want to write your own custom specific interaction, the Flutter environment allows you to go inside of the actual either Java code, Kotlin code, or iOS Swift code, so that you can create your own kind of interaction and API that will connect with the Flutter environment.
Yeah. When building complex apps in Flutter, what are the architecture patterns do you prefer? Like block, provider, riverpod, or something else, and you'll tell us why. And I'll combine this with another question that says, how do you approach code organization and project structure in large Flutter projects to keep things maintainable as the teams and features grow?
For the code organization, I like to go with the popularity, which is mostly clean architecture. So separating your domain, your data, your core features from your actual views, and making so that everything that's a reusable component or a reusable widget is in a shared directory. If you have a set of screens that you're having on your app, they're in their own directory. In terms of the design or architectural patterns, I think the ones that I appreciated the most when developing the app was one dependency injection, and the second one is a repository pattern. So dependency injection mainly because if you're using OOP, you know that a lot of times you might call something like a service that will hit an API, and you might use it in a lot of other places. And normally, every time you call that service or you initialize it, it creates or it takes a bit of memory from your app. It's not very bad when it's in the backend system, even though it's also bad, but it's also more more evident or recognizable when it's running on a mobile device. So dependency injection helped to create only one instance of a service and being able to use it across the app. You've mentioned Riverpod for state management. That is also something that we used not too much, only where we needed it, because also using state management, global state management everywhere is not very good. But yeah, I think those were the main things that I was happy that we used on the app.
Yeah, great. So what are some common anti-patterns or mistakes you see developers make within Flutter?
When they say developers, I'm also a part of it, so
Yeah, so you
mistakes.
make.
The most common one for me that I got to realize along the way was logging. I know most of the times we like to use console log or print when it's in Flutter. But the challenge there is you might want to be logging something that you want to keep track of when you're in production, and you won't be able to have that access when it's in production. Maybe in debugging you'll want to use it, but it's not really the best way to make use of that small piece of code. So it's better to use some kind of logging system where you'll say, if I'm in this environment, it'll just do a normal print. If I'm in production, it'll send the logging to some kind of server where I'll have access to and read whatever I have to read. That's one. The other one is mixing business logic with an actual view. So because Flutter is reactive, because Flutter uses the same approach where you can build a component out of code, we can tend to be interested in adding all of the business logic and the view in all the same file. And it's not bad, but it can be problematic along the way. Mainly because now you'll have a very big widget that'll have everything in your code, and when you want to debug, it'll be very hard. And if worst case scenario, you want to use the same logic somewhere else, either you'll have to create some kind of util, or worse, you have to duplicate what you had and then move it. The last one is mostly on a performance perspective. It's the lack of use of constant constructors, especially on Flutter. So when you use a constructor, mainly it's for calling up a widget. And most times widgets are stateless, so they don't change their states. It's just one thing, it's not going to change values. And when you don't use a constant inside of your constructor or near your constructor, it becomes a performance overhead because you're kind of telling Flutter, hey, this widget here is always going to change states. So anytime Flutter is going to re-render a view, it's going to include that one a part of the things to re-render. I think those are the three things that I see common that happen. I am also included in that.
Yeah, maybe my biggest takeaway on that is on code organization, right? Sometimes you go in code bases and you see a file with 2,000 lines of code. And okay, it's fine when you're one developer, doing everything. But imagine a time when someone else, tries to onboard on the same project.
Or worse, you find out you're the one who had written those 2,000 lines of code.
Yeah, so it will be a nightmare, right?
Yeah.
So let's try to keep things modular, right? And also, what tools or techniques do you use to diagnose and fix performance issues in Flutter apps? I'll combine this with another one that says, can you share your process for identifying memory leaks or unnecessary rebuilds in Flutter?
Okay, that's a good question. So for those kind of scenarios, when you're running on a local development environment, you can use the native Flutter tools. I think they've built a really good ecosystem to be able to analyze and identify memory leaks. Most times that will happen in re-renders. And also not releasing a change notifier or something that's managing some kind of state. But the Flutter ecosystem or the tools that come with the SDK themselves help you enough to do that. So if you're whether you're running Flutter on something like VS Code or something like Android Studio, they've built tools to allow you to analyze and get those memory leaks faster. If you're running in some kind of environment that's outside of your local, so let's say production, it's better to use a third-party tool that works well with the SDK that you're using. For Flutter especially, I think the ones that I've noticed that are really good to analyze performance in general, it's New Relic or Sentry. Mostly Sentry, mainly because they worked a lot to make sure that they have a tool that connects well with not only the app itself from a Flutter level, but also from a low-level perspective.
Yeah, thanks on that. And Last on this deep dive for technical questions, what tools do you use for end-to-end testing?
Well, when we can, because I know people don't like testing too much. When we can, the tool that I've been using for the most part is called Maestro. Maestro is a good tool in it that it helps you, one, either you can have a studio that helps you to do end-to-end tests by actually clicking on the device and then record your interactions. Or if you're not really enjoying that experience, you can actually make use of their YAML configuration. So they have a YAML file where you configure what app you're going to open, which interactions it needs to do, and it'll just automate the whole process. And what it'll do behind the scene is it will open up a VM, whether iOS or Android, and run the app in that VM and then do all the tests that you need to do. The really good thing about it is it's also cloud agnostic, so you can run it in your CI/CD to say, whenever I'm about to release your app, if you have the means to run a VM on CI/CD, then it will do the whole test for you. Yeah.
Great. Now you're going to the next session, which is deployment and release management questions. So the first one will be, walk us through Irembo's process for building and deploying Flutter apps to both Google Play Store and iOS App Store. And also you'll tell us what changes did you encounter and how did you streamline it?
Okay. So I'll start for the first question, the full deployment process. I'll start from the developer's perspective when they're running locally. So whatever change that they will have done, they'll push it in our version control online, which is GitHub. We'll review the whole thing. If it's okay, we merge. And then we'll create an artifact that will actually be considered as the test version of the app. And that will be built in some kind of flavor. Flavor being that you have different flavors based on the environment that you're running on. If it's production, then you have a production flavor. If it's a test, you'll have a test flavor. During the build process, you'll take all of the environment variables that are for the test environment, generate the artifact, and then deploy it in a place where your QA or whoever is in charge of testing will have access to. For us, it's mainly Firebase as well as TestFlight for iOS. Once QA finds that everything is good, thank God, now we'll create the production artifact. The production artifact, all of that will be done still through the CI/CD, but then now the push will actually be done either on the App Store or it will be done on the Google Play Store console. And now that whole process, even though I'm saying CI/CD in general, there's a specific tool that we used mainly on app, and it's called CodeMagic. CodeMagic, especially because of the whole challenge of code signing and generating an artifact for iOS specifically. If you've ever tried to do it with your own hands on a CLI, you'll understand that it's a very tedious task to do, especially knowing that for iOS you need to run that whole process in a Mac-specific kind of machine, whether it be a VM or your local. So the good thing with CodeMagic is they've created the whole set of suite of tools to help you do that. The only thing you need to do is do the configuration to connect your actual CodeMagic account with either Google Play or your App Store account. Yeah. And after that, there's going to be a lengthy review from Play Store, App Store, and if all goes well, you can publish. Yeah.
Some of you may be wondering why go to all of these troubles. But yeah, when you are on this scale of Irembo, what example will I use? Even misspelling something, can really have a huge impact on the whole company. So that's why we ensure that everything that is released, is up to quality. Yeah, and the last question in this section is, how does your team handle quick releases and when a critical bug is discovered in production? What's your emergency deployment process?
It's funny the way you said we like to have high quality, but then you mentioned bugs.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, bugs do happen, and the tricky part for apps is it's not like the web where you can just push and then it's available in the browser. For any kind of app. And I think there you have two processes that you can do. If it's really a critical bug that you have to fix then and then you can use some kind of over-the-air technology. I think for React Native, there's Code Push. I'm not sure if it's still there. But for Flutter, there's other technologies like Shorebird It's paid, but if you really feel like it's valuable for whatever app that you're building, it's something that will help. It'll avoid you going through the whole review process that is done by the App Store, Google Play Store. And there you still go through the release process that you've planned, but now you have two sort of artifacts. The one that will go in the normal process of the release and go in the review, but one that will actually go directly in the code, in the app version of the mobile device that everyone else is using through that Shorebird over-the-air update process. Yeah.
So I think that's kind of a superpower, being able to force the users to get an update. Yeah, on mobile, it's not very common, right? Yeah. So now we're nearing the end, but this section is now about learning and growth. So if you could go back and change one thing about your learning path in the mobile or backend, what would it be?
Well, it's a hard question. I think now I'm very happy that we have LLMs. They do most of the work for you. But if I could go back, I guess I'd try to stick on learning the fundamentals of the Dart language, most especially. Coming from something like JavaScript and then going directly to Flutter is not always easy. So it's better to understand the language itself and then actually do some actual projects practically to understand how everything works. I think those are the main things. If I could add one thing on the side is if you can get a good community that you're going to work with, a group of friends or a blog or Discord chat, whatever helps you to at least keep yourself up to date with whatever is happening. And yeah, I think that's mainly what I would say.
I think one common mistakes that beginners make is just watching tutorials over and over. It doesn't get you that far. Try to get comfortable with reading documentations, right? And actually building something instead of
tutorials are good. The one problem is now these days you have to be careful which tutorial you're looking at, because you might have a tutorial look at YouTube, like 1 hour tutorial, the graphics are good, and then you pass 1 hour and then the results are really not what you're expecting.
Yeah. Now to the next question. What's the weirdest bug you've ever faced in Flutter?
The weirdest bug, I think, has to go with the dynamic form that we're talking about. I think when we're building it, since it's a very state management intensive thing that we worked on, we had a very weird scenario where we would have configured a form to be visible, to have an input that's visible based on the input of another form or another form input. And what would happen, I don't know what, I still don't remember what, but somehow you'd find like the whole form is not actually providing the values or the fields that you're expecting. It's, instead of hiding that field or making it visible, it's duplicating the same field over and over again. And you'd have like an infinite loop of inputs that you're having with the same values. That was a very, very annoying bug to try to fix.
How did you fix it?
I still don't remember to this day.
Okay. What was the most painful lesson you learned about the App Store deployments that you wish someone had warned you about?
I think the experience was mainly on the App Store side. And it just shows how Apple is very, very diligent with whatever they're releasing. So we're done with the development. We were like, job is done. We're just going to click one button, and then that's it. And for the Google Play Store and App Store, they go through a review process, which is standard for everyone. But for Apple, they're a bit more like very keen on whatever is going to roll out. And so they had a test account to see how the app was going to feel like. They logged in, they saw everything that was there, and they noticed that a lot of the things that we're providing were government-related services. It was like, you're not allowed to provide government services on an app. You need permission from the government. And they gave us back an email saying, hey, we can't allow you to release this app because you're offering government services and you're not a government entity. And we're like, but this is Irembo, like Irembo and Rwanda is providing. But yeah, obviously Apple doesn't know that Rwanda and Irembo are working together.
Yeah.
So we had a lot of back and forth trying to prove them that we're actually allowed to do it, to a point where we actually had to get a letter from the minister to allow us to roll out the app. And that passed like 1 month. The good thing is they're very interactive, but to get the actual evidence is what took time. So
Yeah.
if you're ever going to go in a tender to build an app for the government, just be prepared to have a letter to back up your release.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, where do you see Flutter heading in the next 2 to 3 years, especially with AI and cross-platform development evolving?
It's not very clear, especially with the way React Native is getting more hype. I think there are some very recent changes that they did, I think, in end of 2024, where they improved the way they compile code. So it'll be interesting to see how Flutter and React will do some kind of competition there. But it's not very clear where it will head, especially with the whole restructuring that Google is doing with prioritization in AI and all that. But what I do know is they're going to find some way to embed AI, like you said, in their offering with Flutter. We can see that even with all of the releases that they've done in the past. And I think they're probably going to start focusing more on other devices other than mobile, since that's the one thing where React and React Native are probably have a higher ground on them. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you think Flutter is ready for large-scale enterprise applications, or is there still work to be done?
I was skeptical like 2 years ago, but I think right now I think that Flutter is actually very much a framework that you would want to use if you want to build scalable and a large-scale application. Mainly because when you're looking at building a large-scale application, you want to look at a set of things: the developer ecosystem and the developer experience, the actual security of whatever you're using, the standardization of tools that you're using, which also goes in hand with the developer experience, and like the long-term sustainability of it, or less frequent breaking changes. And from my point of view, I think in the past there was a lot of changes that they were doing just so that they can have some kind of good level of structure. But with the whole ecosystem that's backing them, with the effort that they've put in, I can say that I'm pretty confident that you can handle most of the thing, especially on the security perspective. In the SDK itself, they have tools to help you do things like obfuscation, so that no one will try to do some kind of reverse engineering of your code base when it's in production. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's very important for us, even. The security aspect of things, if you're a small, let's say, a solo developer or a startup, it might not be a big concern for you because you're still trying to convince people, to use your app. But if you're an established organization, these are things you need to really take a good care of. My last question, what advice would you give to someone just starting with Flutter?
Get a Claude subscription.
Claude, okay.
No, I think it's similar to what I said before. Really make sure that you get the basics of the Dart programming language, at least to a point where you can code Dart without having too much to go in the documentation. Find a test project that you want to work on that has the basics like localization, internationalization, where you can at least, if you can, do some kind of CI/CD deployment, where you can do some kind of state management, and where you can do some kind of API requests. I think that's the most common pattern that is used on mobile apps. If you can also add in offline mode, where you can actually cache data in your device, and along the way, have room to try, fail, see what works, see what doesn't work. And the last point, still have a good LLM companion on the side. Even though many people might not want to say it, but AI is really a part of our development ecosystem, and it helps you. We were talking about accelerated development, regardless of the platform framework you use. AI is going to help you doing things fast. You just have to be maybe careful as to what it's writing, because it could write some things that's nonsense, which comes into play with making sure at least that you understand the code, the Dart language, before you try to jump into something that's too risky. Yeah. In my opinion, Claude, from what I saw, is the one that's really nice with Flutter. I don't know what they did, but it handles Flutter code better than other LLMs.
Okay, like also on my side, yeah, Claude is so good with code, because it's just focused on that. Other LLMs are mostly general purpose, right? But if you've ever used MCP with Claude, it's so interesting.
Yeah.
So thanks, Sam. That was my questions I had prepared. Now the time is for you, the audience. Remember, I still have I still have a lot of things to give, but
Sure.
yeah, let's start with the guy.
Okay.
My name is Abraham. Thank you for presentation. You mentioned, if I'm not mistaken, like the app development took 1 month. Yes, I don't want someone tomorrow to come tell me, can you do it in 1 month? Irembo also do it in 1 month. So I'd like to understand, like, was it the coding of the app, or was it like the design and also the learning, or like did everyone knew like about Flutter before and all of that, and that whole process? Because from my perspective in a startup, all that is included in app development. Like maybe the designer start the design one day after, and then they tell you, oh, you do back and you don't need the design, which is not true, and all of that. You see, so really, what time did that take from idea?
Thank you. That's a good question. Maybe we skipped that, but in general, we were talking that 1 month or 2 months that we were talking about was the development. So by the time we started, the mockups were already generated and all that. But it's not just about Flutter that made it fast. To give you context, almost no one in the team knew Flutter and knew how to develop Flutter at the time. But the good thing about it, I think I had mentioned it in previous points, is it's opinionated and it has a version of control, meaning you don't have multiple ways to do something. They show you, if you want to do a list, here's the way. If you want to do routing, there are probably 3 ways, but the most common way to do it is this way. And it helps with the learning curve, because now you don't have to guess or say, okay, which one is the best thing to use? Is this one? Is this one? The third one is also the type system. So having types in your code base in general is like having a good documentation. So you don't have to have developers always asking you, is it supposed to be like this? Is it supposed to be like this? Like, as soon as you see the code itself, you know, okay, I'm supposed to use it this way. The other thing, I guess, is we had really good and flexible guys that wanted to work. Yeah. I hope that clarifies the answer. Not enough?
I believe you guys have QA, right? Yeah. Yeah, and QA alone can delay you by 1 or 2 weeks.
Okay, now you're saying it like QA is bad. But when I say we had really flexible guys, the QA are also a part of it. Like late night, we'd ping them, hey, here's the new build, can you test it? They were really able. Like everyone was aware we had to deliver something and fast.
You just mentioned one thing that's stuck in my mind. You mentioned one thing that's about global state. You said that to use global states, it is not good in Flutter. Maybe we normally, as a developer, use the global state management like blog, GetX, even we have to use Redux. I just want to know why it is not good to use the global state management.
Okay, thank you. I didn't mean to say it's not good to use global state. Maybe I spoke too fast, but it's not good to overuse global state. There are some times where you're like, okay, I'm going to do an authentication mechanism. I'm going to do login. I need to save the username and password in a global state. Like, it's okay, but it's a bit overusing global state management, because one, you're not going to need the username and password in all of your pages. You're just going to use it for that specific functionality. maybe the token is what you'll need to keep somewhere in some kind of global state. But now you need to be aware of, okay, do I need actually to use global state for this use case or not? And be very intentional with how you're going to use it, because it can run in some cases where you have your states running around and you don't know how to maintain it. Because something that is very hard to debug is global state that's not behaving the way you want to. So it's really making sure that if you're going to use global state, you really need to use it for the specific reason. Yeah. In my personal opinion, if I'm doing something for the first time and I haven't tried it yet, I'll try first to use whatever is there apart from global state. So if it's sharing data between one page or another, I'll probably pass it through some props. But if I feel like, okay, this information is probably going to be used in a lot of places, maybe let's say you have a login and then it saves your personal information. That personal information is going to be used probably in a lot of places on the app. That's a very clear place where you want to use your global state. Yeah.
Great.
I have two questions. I think the first one would be, it sounds like you guys have been happy with Flutter. So are you planning to start exploring it in upcoming projects, or is this the one you had in mind and then maybe you can evaluate after? The second question would be, you mentioned the hurdles of going through the approval processes with the App Store, and I know one thing they're very fuss about is payments, and I know you have payments in the app, so I would love to know how you get around that to use your Irembo Pay inside the app in that examples. Thank you.
The first question was if we were planning on using Flutter or another. Well, it depends on if there's actually a project that's going to come. But I think the way it goes, if we were able to provide actually the value proposition of a tool, we could use Flutter down the line. We've used other projects to work. We've worked on other projects using something like React Native. It's just now saying, okay, what do we need for what purpose? If it's quick prototyping, can we use X or can we use Y? Not a definitive answer. I'm not sure yet, but if we ever get a project, I think that we'll most likely try to use Flutter. For the second, for the app review process, we actually had, I think, a blessing in disguise. Because the payment process that's happening on the app is Momo-based, it's not actually happening inside of the app. So it was kind of like a loophole saying that technically the payment isn't happening inside of the app. We're just like aiding someone to get to a specific item. Yeah.
I'm Denise, and I'm a Flutter developer. So I have three questions. The first one, would you kind of like share the limitations of Flutter that you found? Came next, might have told you maybe answered that question in the presentation. The second question is, did you ever find did you ever use Flutter to support the mobile services, like Irembo services? And the third question, did you ever face the issue of data corruption like in your Flutter apps? If so, was something like mutex involved? Or if not, how did you solve that issue?
So just to make sure I understood well, the first question was the limitations of Flutter. Third one is Huawei services. And the third one was data corruption, right? Okay. For the first one, for the limitations, as of now, none yet. I'm not trying to give any benefits or props to Flutter. It's just that personally, whatever we needed to do, which is not too much, we were able to do it with what's available. In terms of the Huawei services, well, even though they don't have Google or Google Play Store, there's still some kind of version of Android, right? So they can still run APK. It's just that it's in a different distribution channel. I think that's a good question we didn't think of. We'll probably see if we can have the channels. Thank you for that. But to counter that, if we really wanted to have people who have Huawei devices available to use the app, we would use those channels, or we would just put it in one of those websites like APK Pure, where someone can just download the APK for themselves. For the last one, for the data corruption, we haven't had any yet, probably because the app is still minimal. But when we do, I'll make sure to give you a call.
what would you say about using Flutter for web development because it is cross-platform? So the reason I ask this is I'm not really a big fan of Flutter. I came here just to get convinced. So last week I think I was freelancing and this guy came to me and said, can you transform this Flutter website into real? And I inspected the app. It was weird because I don't know if it got updated, but the last time I checked, the way Flutter generates a web app creates a kind of a canvas, a specific HTML. And I don't think that's a good idea because I couldn't expect nothing was a canvas. That's bad because if you really use semantic HTML and stuff and accessibility, that's a good thing. So my question is, would you recommend building web apps with Flutter? If so, how would you approach those accessibility stuff?
Thank you. I'll first answer by saying just because you can develop something in a language doesn't mean you should just because it's popular. Reason being why I'm saying that is there are tons of frameworks in this world. There are even frameworks that can help you code front end with Java, but no one wants to do that. So for Flutter specifically, I guess here you'd choose it because it's something that's been adopted more for the mobile ecosystem. And if you were to switch on something like the web ecosystem, you'd look at popular frameworks, things like maybe React, Angular, just because people actually took their time and saying, we want to build something that's native to that experience. Same way, you could build something with like Cordova, which is kind of web and kind of a hybrid app at the same time, but it's not the ideal way to do it. But you could do it if you want to. So for now, I wouldn't recommend using Flutter for the web. I think that's why in the last question I said that's probably something that the Flutter team is going to try to work a lot on, since that's the thing that React has a more higher advantage on. But at the moment, even though Google themselves use some parts of their tools with Flutter on the web, I would recommend using something that's commonly known, mainly because of the developer ecosystem. You're not going to be the only developer in your team that's developing a Flutter for the web.
Yeah, one thing I'd like to add on that, this app, probably most of you have interacted with it, called Ticket, right? So in extreme cases, right, where you need really to develop something really fast. So that system was developed in a week, and the guy did both mobile and web. So understandably, it would have taken long, right? Or more people to get the same work done. So they were bidding for, let's say a tender, and they had to do things fast. So in those extreme cases, that could be a saver, but it doesn't mean in the long run you should always do that. Yeah. And the good thing is that all of that comes from one code base, right? And you develop for multiple platforms and devices.
My question is about when it comes to authentications. Normally we are using local storage for Android tokens, and what if we need to use something like cookies to process those data? Is it possible for Flutter to use something like cookies? Another thing is how do you compare the size of APK? When you compare it with React Native, and when it comes to the deployment, I have tried before to create an account DNS now, how did you overcome those challenges? How do you see the impact for the startups or the young developers who is trying to develop some apps which is has more features than those they offer for the individual? Because you might be stuck when you try to deploy some apps when you don't have DNS now.
Okay, so the first question was? Okay, cookies. Second one was the, okay, size, and then the DO. Okay. Okay. So for the first one, I think in general, you could use cookies. I guess when you're saying cookies, you mean interaction with an API, right? Yeah, normally if it's a cookie, then the API is the one that provides that cookie and handles the authentication with your mobile device based on some kind of specific identifier. If you need to store something like a JWT, let's say, in your local, I would encourage not using local storage, but secure storage, mainly because secure storage now does some kind of hashing or encryption to make sure that if someone has access to your app, and they can, and they access all of the storages and information in it, they won't be able to decrypt whatever you have in your storage. For the second one, in terms of the bundle size, I think in general, it depends on maybe how you manage the things you put in your code. Because at the end of the day, if you put an image that's 5 megabytes, it's going to be a big app. But you can use, same way you can use tools in Flutter. There are some tools that help you to do things like tree shaking. Tree shaking meaning removing any unnecessary code that's not used and minifying everything. If you want to go more specifically, especially on Android, you can target specific SDK platforms to make sure that either you can choose to say, I want my app to be available to any kind of form factor on Android, or you say, I know my app is going to be delivered in specific versions of Android, so I'm targeting these ones, and based on that, it reduces more the model size of your app. And that's not just on Flutter, it's on most standard. As long as it goes down to an APK, it should do that. And additionally, if by the time you upload your actual APK to the App Store, they also do some kind of minification to convert it into an ABB. And that ABB, most of the times, depending on the device you're running on, will be smaller than the actual file that you've uploaded. Now, for the last one, remind me again, it's... So for that one, we didn't have an issue with it. I'm not sure. Maybe I came in when the account was already created, but we didn't have any issue with it. We went through, I think, a form process where we mentioned that we were affiliated with a government, and then that's when we provided the documents that I've mentioned. We didn't, and we also paid the 1 year's developer fee that we have to pay. I don't know if it's an answer, but it's a bit tedious to upload apps in general as a sole developer on the App Store. But we also need to understand that for them, it's like they have a brand, they have an image, and they want to make sure that not everyone just uploads an app. Because some people might try to upload an app maliciously. I guess that's as much of an answer I can give. Yes.
Simon, and I am a data scientist and also mobile. I have a question about you didn't mention it when you started, about the mobile app, the Irembo app. So mainly they use, I think they are targeting the car owners and also few users. So like myself, I haven't used Irembo not because they don't have services and all that, but because I don't need those services often. So that means that if I have the app, I might spend some time not using it because I don't have a car and all that, yeah. So what is the future of the Irembo app? Do you consider adding other services, or why mainly the driver of the car?
Okay. So we started off with those 4 because one, we wanted to create some kind of MVP. We didn't want to create something and then find out that it's something that people don't want to use or don't like enjoying to use in the first place. So we said, okay, what are the services that we think people use the most? In general, we saw that traffic fines is the one that people use a lot. Mostly because people tend to make some kind of mistake and they have to pay for that. If you're not a car owner, there are other services. If you're single, there's a certificate of being single. If you're married, there's a certificate of being married. So we try to identify at least things that people can share and see if people are actually interested in the app. We didn't want to do some kind of hack where the app can render some kind of web page or whatever. We really wanted to see, is the app actually valuable to whoever is going to use it? If you're owning a car, is it actually helpful for you? If maybe you need a certificate, do you feel like the experience getting a certificate is better than the normal way? It's not too fancy, it's very small. I think a lot of people mentioned why are there so few services. That's the reason why. In terms of next step, we are analyzing what are the things that people like to use the most. Not necessarily Irembo related, so it could be even outside of what Irembo itself provides. Maybe things like paying for a water bill, electrical bill, parking, things like that. I won't tell everything, you'll get the surprise when you see it.
Yeah. One thing I'd like to add on that, we also have the service to pay me 12 on the app. And I think for most people that would also count. And another thing is that if you notice, it's not Irembo Gov app, right? It's Irembo app. So we recently launched Irembo Plus also with, for now, the public, the private sector, right? For businesses. So all of those services like paying for your Canal Box internet, paying for Canal Plus, that's like TV subscription. So all of that could potentially come to the app too, right? So, but one key thing to keep in mind, it's not just bringing the service, it's reimagining, how can we elevate the experience? Not just, putting everything on the app, but really providing value for you, the users.
And how basically as Irembo as a random market first company actually the challenges you made, especially after the deployment of the app, the feedback, for example, you just mentioned developing the MVP. After developing the MVP, how do you actually acquire the feedback that you need to actually know exactly the services you need to integrate in the app? And that would be my first question. I'm not sure if it's related to your department specifically. My second one will be related to the cost. Which one, based on cost, which one would you recommend to a startup just starting React Native or Flutter? Yeah, and my third and last question will be related to AI. There's been a lot of talk about AI, integrating your AI within your workflow. So a lot of people have been saying how it's going to replace, and other people say no, it's not going to replace you. It's going to basically, you're going to be replaced by the person who knows how to use AI, basically who's using it to speed up their work. So my question will be, is Irembo looking at basically hiring people and looking through that lens, just like I just mentioned? Yeah, that would be it.
Okay, thank you. In terms of the first question for the analytics, yes, we do have some way to gather insights through the app. It's not directly our department from a developer's perspective, but we work with the people who are in charge of actually providing insights. So while developing the app, we went through all the user journeys and said, what are the critical parts that we need to analyze in general? And we use tools first, Mixpanel, so that we can have a custom tool that helps us to send events and actually analyze the whole user journey of a person using the app, knowing where something is not working the way it should, and then saying, okay, do we need to adjust? We're still in the beginning phases, but we've collected a bit of feedback, not directly from the user, on how some things can be best implemented. That's one. The other part is mainly the feedback, the actual written feedback from users. Right now, most of them was, we don't have enough services on the app. Yeah. But some others are saying, maybe if you could do this way, and we say, okay, maybe you can analyze it that and do some improvements. But the main one that's contributing is the analytics that we're getting from this tool that I mentioned called Mixpanel. And some other analytics, mostly on the performance side, we're using New Relic. New Relic is helping us to know, is our app slow? Is our app behaving in a certain way on a specific device? Has an app actually crashed on specific form factors? What do we have to do to fix it? So in terms of an analytics perspective, that's what we use to get those insights for now. We're still exploring what could be best, but as of now, those are the things that we used. For the second question, I think you've mentioned AI. Sorry? Yeah. Okay. Well, there it's more contextual. You can't just say I'm using Flutter or I'm using React Native. If you're a startup and you have to deliver something very fast, maybe you have a tender that you want to do, and all of you are really good at React, then the obvious choice would be to say, let's go with React, at least provide the value proposition that we want to do. If we see in the actual implementation that some things aren't working well with what we have, then we can go back. If you're in a team of 20 people and you're working in a company that's, I'll say, established, and they know that they have probably enough time to develop, and they know that whatever you're developing now is going to be for the long run, and they don't want to go back in the drawing boards, then even using Android, Jetpack Compose would be the safest way if you have time. If you need some kind of fast-paced development, then you can say, okay, maybe I'll consider using Flutter. So it depends on the whole context of why you want to build the app. In general, it's always good to use either Flutter or React Native if you want to build, because now you have a value proposition that you can actually feel on both devices without having to write two things at once. Now, from there, it depends on your actual background of how you're trying to implement. For the last question, it's for AI. So for that one, I think of it the same way when the computer came. Like before we had accountants. Accountants were really good at their jobs. They had a whole drawer full of papers where they wrote their balance sheet and all that. And they were good at their jobs. But when Microsoft brought Excel, like it changed a whole lot of things, right? Not replaced them, but it just enhanced their experience. So for me, for now, because it's a bit different, it's a bit hard to differentiate replacing and enhancing. But for now, I feel like it's more of enhancing whatever job that you're doing. I'm not as knowledgeable to tell you exactly if it's going to replace you or not. But what's for sure is it's good enough to have context as to what you're trying to build, but you need to provide it enough context itself for it to understand, I need to do this and this and this. And you have to be very detailed and tell it, I want this, and this, or it'll just give you a whole lot of nonsense. So I think that's the gap that's, or at least in my perspective, that's differentiating that replacing and that actual enhancing.
Yeah. One.
About the replacement, it was more about if you required a teammate in your team, would you require them to know how to use AI? Would that be a requirement to integrate that person in your team?
Okay, I'll answer that with a question. If you have two people, one that is using a tool to deliver an output in, let's say, 1 day with the help of that tool, and another developer that had to spend sleepless nights to deliver the same output in probably a week, what would you choose? Okay, so it depends. But generally, you would want to have someone at least that knows how I was going to say quid debrouiller, to know how to navigate. Yeah. Because before before AI, there was Google, there was Stack Overflow. Like you would have developers that would either say, I'm going to just try and error, or they're going to say, I'm going to use the documentations, Google, Stack Overflow. So the resourcefulness. It's not a matter of knowing if you're using AI or not, because you could also be using AI but not asking the right prompts. You could also be using AI but not the right LLM that's fit for what you're doing. So as long as you show me that you're resourceful, right now it's just that because of the hype, the factor that shows someone's resourcefulness is AI. That's why many people would say a requirement would be AI. But for me, as long as you show that you're resourceful, it would be enough for me to say, okay, you're good and you know how to navigation challenges.
So you use it as an indicator for resourcefulness. Does it?
I use resourcefulness to know, okay, how did you solve the problem? You could use an AI LLM, but even the prompt that you're using, it's not really making any much sense. Don't know if that makes.
Yeah.
I haven't really deployed an app with Flutter yet, but I'm trying to. I wanted to thank you guys for the app. It's really nice, and there's also some nice Easter eggs, which is cool. But my question is about the deployment of the app. You mentioned that the App Store is a bit more stringent on the review process. I wanted to know, if you release maybe a new version, how long does it take you to reach, for it to reach the people? And also, you also mentioned about using OTA updates, something along those lines, to deliver updates to users directly, skipping the whole review process. It would be nice if you could explain that process a bit more. Yeah.
So for the first question, the review process when you're launching the app for the first time is the one that could take long, mainly because there you're filling in, especially on the App Store, you're filling information that the App Store needs to know about you to say, okay, how do we need to handle whatever this person is going to be releasing? So they're going to ask you a bunch of questions like, do you have in-app payments? Are you an NGO? Are you affiliated to an NGO? Do you have some kind of sensitive information that you're storing in your app about someone? And all of that is going to come to a decision of whether what you have in your app is eligible to be released on the App Store. From there, the good thing with Apple and Google Play Store is they have like a 2-day policy. So within 2 days, normally you have a feedback on whatever new version you have pushed, whether it be pushback or an approval to proceed. Most times you'll get an approval. It's only if you're trying to do something that seems shady, maybe trying to open I think the most common one that I saw is if you're trying to open a web view inside of the app in a specific way, Apple is not going to appreciate that much. They're going to tell you, if you want to open a web view, you need to open it this specific way. For the Play Store, we didn't have that much pushback. It's maybe the way we've built the first time the version of the APK that they said you could do it this way. So that's for the initial app release and when you increment versions along the way. For the over-the-air updates, that one, it depends on the platform you're using. The ones I've used was for React Native with Code Push. At the time, it was owned by Microsoft. I don't know if it's still the case. And for Flutter, it's Shorebird. The technology is essentially, it's like they have their server, they have some version of your code, of your bytecode, and they have your app as kind of like a client. And now anytime you do over-the-air updates, you're like pushing the bytecode that you've changed into their server. And then what they're going to do, they're going to identify all the clients that are active and then propagate that bytecode there. And the actual APK or package that you would have downloaded or installed for your app is going to detect that and then update the app. So it has different strategies. You could say, I want the app to update itself right away. Or you say, on the next restart, I have downloaded the bytecode. I'm just going to modify whatever was there and put in the new bytecode. Don't know if that makes sense.
Okay, I'm still confused about Apple. Wouldn't they not appreciate that? Because they want you, like every update you make, to review, they want to review it. But now you're kind of skipping them entirely. Like, isn't it kind of forbidden?
So it depends on what you're pushing, right? Because I think there's also a limit in the bytecode that you can actually push. If you have an image or an actual asset file that you're going to push along your code, that's not going to be possible. Again, it's also very, very tricky or risky to try to push a really huge chunk of code in the same go. Better to test it before, but you'd want to use an over-the-air update mainly when you have like a bug or something that you need to really address fast. I think even other companies like Instagram and Facebook, there are sometimes when they've done an over-the-air update and it backfired and they had to do some kind of rollback. Yeah.
Now we're going to take one final question. Two.
Yeah, let's do two.
Okay.
So you know that the developers sometimes they want to test in the before they give out security to avoid the background for project comments. device, and also testing your simulator solution to actually test your application and see your real-time updates during the development process.
Could you maybe elaborate on that question? I'm not sure I understood.
Let's say I want to test out an application on a physical device and also writing the code as well. For example, let's say when I make a small piece of content, when I make a small change in my post, then I want to see actually happening or actually updating on my physical device. So it's Flutter have a solution for that.
I believe so. It has hot reload. I think it's what I had tried to explain in the presentation. They do two things. They have the ahead of time compilation, which is what they use when they're building their APK or IPA that's going to be deployed in the app stores. But when you're developing locally, they have just-in-time compilation, and it's commonly known as hot reload. So what essentially they do is they create an APK or an IPA, but they have their VM that runs on top. And now what will happen is any change that you're doing, the compiler will detect that change and then make the adjustment on the VM based on what you've changed on your code.
Yeah, another thing I can add on that is that you can connect your device to your machine using USB debugging or even wireless debugging so that you can see your changes in real time.
Okay, I've heard that React has some kind of tool which they use, I think it's called, and they have like some feature replicable development tools where you can actually, whether you have like an Android phone or an iOS phone, or whether it's iOS also have like a very strict guidance when you're trying to install an application which is not really out from the app store. Okay? So when you install that in all computers, like you are actually running the application on a physical device, and when you make like real-time code changes, it also updates instantly. So that is going to give you the feed, the exact feed on how your application is going to be like when you deploy it on the store as well. So I was trying to wonder like there's some kind of similar tools.
Well, I don't think there's a tool that Flutter itself provides, mainly because of the difference between Expo and Flutter. Expo having some kind of VM that helps to run anything related to JavaScript. But for Flutter, if you use something like CodeMagic, they have a tool that helps you to say, I'm going to allow someone, even though it's not Android or they don't have a physical device on Android, iOS, I'm going to replicate whatever is going to be actually used by the user. So it's the actual production build, but that is kind of running like in a VM in the server. So it's not a direct, exact solution to what you've mentioned. But from my knowledge, you can do the over-the-air updates, but you wouldn't use the over-the-air updates that's native for Flutter. Because we know that other companies who are using native Android or native iOS, they also have over-the-air technologies that they use. I'm not aware of them, but I do know that they use them. But now that means that you essentially have two tools that are helping you to do over-the-air updates. Since we know that if you're using something like React Native CLI or Flutter, you can do changes in the actual native code. That means that now you'll have to handle a scenario where you need to do over-the-air updates for your bytecode on Flutter, on JavaScript, or over-the-air updates of the actual implementation that you're going to do. I haven't tried that personally, but I feel like that would be a risky thing to try to do. Initially, you have two ways you can handle it. The first one is either you have some kind of internationalization system that's not inside of the app. So you'd use like a tool that like Localize that actually handles your translations through some kind of HTTP request. And the only thing or text that is in your app are keys. And then from there, same approach that is done on the web, you'll just, based on the update that you've done, you'll just replace the translation that you've done there. Now, if you did a change that is in a text, if that text is in the Flutter code base or the React Native code base, which is what will happen most of the case, it will still be a part of the over-the-air update that you're trying to do. If you're trying to change a text that's somewhere else, there I'm not very sure how that would go. But most of the times it will be either in the code base of Flutter or of React Native. Yeah.
Now our final question, the guy. You can give him the mic, right?
Thank you. My name is Musa.
about Flutter itself. So let us assume that we are building a governmental application that is of specific motion. Like for example, if you are building a gym application or governmental application, so institution, for those kind of institutions, they require a lot of changes from NEWA, and it's understandable they come with those changes. So I'm asking, is Flutter having this feature to make it possible to make those changes without like relaunching this whole system or rebuilding the entire application from the beginning, or it is just depending on the how you structure this kind of
When you mean rebuilding, you mean us rebuilding and then deploying on the app stores, right? Okay. I think it goes hand in hand with what we're talking about for over-the-air updates. So if there's a change actually in the code that you need to modify, then you'll have to, if you set up your app to handle it, you could use the over-the-air updates, or you'll have to go through the whole process of building and deploying it on the app stores and then do some kind of force update. Now for us, for specific scenarios where we know things change a lot, we've made it so that the information is dynamic in it, that it's coming through some kind of API, so that we know if it's a form that we have and they want it to be changed in a specific way, we don't have to do a rebuild of the entire app. We can just modify it through its data storage, and then it will just replicate through all of the apps. If it's, let's say, a new component or a brand new widget that they're bringing it all together, that's where we'll have to actually do the over-the-air updates and propagate it in all the other users. And that's not in Flutter specifically. If it's basically, it's purely a design decision that you make, regardless of the platform that you're developing on. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. I think the time is up. Bye, no one. Sure.
My name is Christian. My question is about what are the key challenges while developing across apps in Flutter, and how did you overcome them?
A good question. I think in general, it was the whole styling experience that was the main challenge for me. Mainly because we know the app is going to run on different devices. We had to make sure that the app can be visually good in a big screen or in a very small screen. I think the first mistake personally that I know I had done was adjustment of padding of some kind of screen and making overflow mistakes where you just see like a banner that's happening, like an overflow that's happening on a component you created. So it took time to actually understand what's the right way to style and size components in the app. Yeah.
My name is Vincent. I'm a software engineer too, and I also like to develop a lot of applications using Flutter. I mean, there is these challenges that I face. I mean, maybe everyone faces those kind of challenges. They tell you about sweet things about Flutter, but when you start developing, you start facing some real world challenges. I mean, one of these was like coming with this platform identity. Okay, let me explain myself. You need like your app to feel like an iOS application for iPhone users, and you want it to also feel like Android, like this material UI stuff for like Android. I mean, it's also something that I saw with this app here. Trying to navigate into it, I was still getting some Android element to on the iOS. Flutter has like many ways of trying to fix it. One of it is asking which platform the user is on, and there is also this platform widget stuff where like it has like few widgets in it. So I was kind of looking for a smart way of achieving these kind of things. I'm having some app that I'm building, and I really need it to have this platform identity. What smart way can you maybe advise me? If maybe not you, or someone in your projects.
Thank you. So maybe I'll give my point if someone else wants to. So on my perspective, with whatever we built, like we said, we wanted to really build something that has kind of like an MVP, see if it has a valid proposition, and then maybe fine tune along the way. Specifically to cater that need, I think there you can use, like you've mentioned, there's a property in the Flutter SDK that helps you to indicate if the device is running either on Android or on iOS. And then based on that, you can decide and say if the component is actually being rendered in an actual iOS library or iOS device, I need to use the Cupertino. Now, it wouldn't be very usable if you do it on every single component. Yeah, exactly. So probably separating the pages that have those specific user experience will be simpler. And there it will avoid complexities because you might have a button that's supposed to be placed on the top right for iOS and another one that's supposed to be on the bottom. That's personally what I would.
I would take that one.
I think what I could add is something you said earlier about the architecture. Maybe you could say if this is on iOS, then I'm going to run, if it's on Android, I'm going to run material thing, and then you could go as low as making sure you are architecting your app to use the app. Like you mentioned, is also before the repository structure code. When then you won't end up doing a lot of checks. Then you have, since they're consuming the same repos or the same using dependency injection, they're kind of consuming the same thing, just how they look. That's it. I haven't done it personally, but thinking on top of my head, that introduction so that when you say you detect the mic,
yeah, the theming architecture that you mentioned also is very good. It helps also with things like dark mode, light mode. It also helps with handling Android and iOS native styling. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, guys. We've come to an end of our tech talk. I'd like to give the floor back to Ian or Giza if Ian is not around. Thanks.